Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining a few minutes early. We're going to get started at the hour. So in the meantime, feel free to change your name to include your organization, as this will be helpful for orienting to who is in the room later. Hello, everyone. We are at the top of the hour. We're going to give one more minute for folks to trickle in as they're moving between meetings, and then we will get started with our rich agenda for today. So as you're joining, if you're able, please turn or switch your name or rename yourself to include your name and your organization. This will help us understand who's in the room and facilitate some of our discussions later. As I said, we'll get started in just a minute as a couple more folks join us.
Good afternoon, and welcome to today's DER Integration and Compensation Initiative virtual workshop. My name is Danielle Sass-Burnett. I am the Senior Director for NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation, and we are co-hosting today with Kirsten Verklaas of NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Officials, and Rodney Sobin from NASEO, and our wonderful colleagues from RMI, formerly Rocky Mountain Institute. So you will hear from all of us today, and importantly, we will also hear from you. I wanted to start by just giving a little bit of background on the initiative under which we are delivering today's programming. In particular, the NARUC NASEO DER Integration and Compensation Initiative was designed a couple of years ago to assist our members across the utility commissions, energy offices, and also increasingly consumer advocates to understand the anticipated growth of distributed energy resources, and in particular, how aggregated DERs can participate in the future in wholesale markets and in the near term in providing distribution grid services and supporting customers. With this initiative, we are really designed to help policymakers and regulators understand how to evaluate and consider and establish rules and requirements that will support DER integration and, of course, compensation, recognizing that there are many technology and economic issues that are going to require the development of new tools and information and resources. This intersection is particularly relevant between the bulk power system and the distribution system, which is where we've done a lot of our work. The initiative itself is designed to convene and support our state members across the different organizations that I mentioned. This is, of course, in the context of FERC Order 2222 and also state policies and state goals around the distribution system, customer, DER, and its integration to the bulk power system. So our focus is informing key state decision makers, helping them understand the risks and opportunities of different decision approaches, and bringing different perspectives to the table, including experts and key stakeholders. We are advised by a group of NARUC and NASEO members from across the country who have helped to guide the project. And finally, I just wanted to share where we are in the DER Integration Compensation Initiative. We have completed a couple of key milestones. In the wintertime, we hosted a series of webinars around grid services, grid valuation of DERs, and compensation. And we'll soon be publishing a foundational document that expands upon that foundation. Right now, we are on the final webinar or virtual workshop on a series of hot topics under Module 2. They were about federal funding for aggregated DERs, interconnection, and now today, integrated distribution system planning, which is an essential planning approach and set of processes that can support the integration of DERs. The second half of the year, we'll go into some deep dives, and you'll hear more about that later and in the coming weeks. So with that grounding, I will turn things over to Katarina Steffen from RMI, who will be our masterful facilitator for today. Thank you all for being here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danielle. As Danielle said, this leads us to where we are today in our series of hot topics. If you missed some of the previous sessions but are interested in learning more about either the federal funding available for ADERs or interconnection, we would invite you to check out the website that is linked on this slide. Will be linked into the chat, as well as this QR code here to see recordings from those sessions, as well as some share out note documents. Similarly, for this workshop, we are recording the presentations and we'll share both this slide deck, our presenter slides, and the recording after this session. Next slide, please. So for today, we have 3 objectives. Our first is to learn about new resources and opportunities for support from the DOE and the national labs on the topic integrated distribution system planning. We'll surface some examples of how IDSP processes are showing up in your jurisdictions today, and we'll also build an inventory of needs and questions to be answered that could advance IDSP practices and support your goals and objectives. To do this, we have a pretty packed agenda that consists of 2 primary parts. The first are presentations. We'll hear an overview of IDSP from Joe Palladino at the DOE, and then we'll learn about new resources and opportunities for support from Lisa Schwartz and Guillermo Pereira at the Berkeley Lab. In the second half of today, there'll be an opportunity for you to surface what's happening in your state, to learn from one another, and then to identify some gaps and needs related to this topic. Our invitations for you to make the most of the session are, again, to change your name to include your first name and your organization here, and also to be curious about how what you hear today relates to this work. We're hoping to both provide resources and opportunities in this conversation, as well as allow for conversations in space to connect what you're hearing to your day-to-day work. As I mentioned before, the plenary session is recorded, but we will stop the recording before the breakouts to enable free-flowing discussion, and we will be sharing the recording and the slides afterwards. So before we get started with our presentations, we want to do a quick check-in question in the chat, get a sense of who's in the room and how you're thinking about integrated distribution system planning. So very simply, please share one word or phrase that comes to mind when you hear IDSP. Excellent. Our first answers are coming in. Equality, DERs, implementation, proactive, efficiency, complex, equity. Great. I'm seeing some adjectives about the process, as well as some specific components here. So we've got non-wireless alternatives, needed, connectivity, and in line with the hot topic. Awesome. Well, feel free to continue adding your words in here as we go. But I would now like to take a moment to introduce our first guest speaker for today. we have with us Joe Palladino, who is a senior advisor within the U.S. Department of Energy, the Energy's Office of Electricity. You may also know him by his less official title, the Godfather of Integrated Distribution System Planning. Joe will provide a foundational overview of IDSP, and we'll have a few minutes for questions afterwards. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat or be prepared to share them live afterwards. We're quite lucky to have him here with us today, so please join me in warmly welcoming Joe.
Well, Katerina, thanks for that introduction. I really appreciate that. I never actually thought of myself as a godfather. I'm wondering what my next job should be after this one. So maybe you'll help me with that one. Um, but I really just want to thank you for letting me be here today. And again, this is a really important topic at the Department of Energy. We think that integrated planning at the distribution system level and even regionally is really critically important. Can you just please move to the next slide? I want to say that, just to give a little bit of history, that I've been involved in this area actually with Danielle at NARUC and Kirsten at NASEO for many years, over 10 years, and work really closely with Lisa Schwartz at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, et cetera. We worked over the past 10 years, probably beginning with California and New York and going from there. We worked closely with regulators, state energy offices, and utilities to really dive into this whole arena of integrated distribution system planning and try to evolve it with again all these stakeholders. And there's still a lot of evolution that has to take place. So I'm just really happy that we're starting to really take a hard look at this. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest in the DOE and moving forward with this and providing best practices, et cetera. And we'll be getting into all of that today. I would just want to share some viewpoints and considerations around integrated planning, IDSP. I wanted to show this picture because integrated planning is becoming really, really important. And with respect to some of the keywords that you folks just noted, it's becoming essential for addressing complexity. Things are becoming much more complex. Uncertainty, because our futures and technology developments, et cetera, are changing all the time. Our policies are changing all the time. And for addressing coordination, and coordination is a really, really important term because it really means how do we bring together in a meaningful way all the participants, including not just utilities, but regulators and state energy offices, et cetera, and their stakeholders, and these DER service providers, et cetera, and customers. How do we bring all those people together in a meaningful way to actually develop a rational, forward-looking grid investment strategy? And to me, that's really what it gets down to. It's coordinating these folks in a highly orchestrated way to really evolve what the grid investment strategy should be. And so in this picture, there are sort of two aspects I just want to throw out. One is that integrated distribution system planning really should address state and community objectives and be able to translate those into multi-year investment strategies. But we're also needing to align integrated distribution system planning with and the community and state strategies with regional and multi-state strategies. And again, we had an effort that we worked together with Danielle and Kirsten on called the Comprehensive Energy Planning initiative. And we're going to have to get back into that because we're going to have to be able to couple integrated distribution system planning with more regional planning efforts and making sure we got this alignment and we've got a cohesive strategies for modernizing the grid. Next slide, please. So simply, integrated distribution system planning really at least the way we're looking at it, really provides a decision framework to formulate these long-term grid investment strategies. And they address really everything in the circle, which includes fundamentally what grid infrastructure do we need to build out just to even deal with electrification, load growth, all of this stuff. How do we address reliability and resilience in a meaningful way? And how do we, because of all this evolution of the grid edge, how do we integrate and utilize effectively distributed energy resources, not only for use by customers, but also for the provision of grid services? And that includes, again, being able to couple the development of guidance and the processes at the state and SEO and Public Utility Commissioner level, and couple that with the systems engineering done by a utility and making sure we're addressing grid edge interactions. But it also includes being able to determine how do we build out our sensing, communication, control, information management infrastructure in a meaningful way to be able to enable all of this orchestration that we're looking towards in the future. So, and again, integrated distribution system planning is trying to bring all of these elements together in a really holistic way. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So there are two aspects of integrated distribution system planning that I just want to note at the beginning. First of all, we're moving from an economic valuation, a cost effectiveness valuation framework into a socio-economic valuation framework, because we're looking at issues like resilience and decarbonization and equity. All of these are impact society, and our policymakers and regulators are really trying to figure out how do we build out the grid or our energy system to be able to address these socioeconomic needs. And so it sort of used to be the regulator and the utility working together, and I know the State Energy Office had a major role there. And really that grouping from the regulator side, let's developing objectives and metrics and priorities that the utility could then do their systems engineering and come back with a responsive investment strategy. The paradigm has shifted and it has enlarged, where now the governor's office, the state legislators, state energy office regulators, the boards of utilities, with their stakeholders, their communities, their consumers, their service providers, we're at a place where we need to evolve and develop processes by which policymakers and regulators with their stakeholders can now sit back, take a look at what their needs are, and develop objectives and metrics and priorities to guide the decision, to guide the planning by utilities. And so there's this upfront piece that really needs to evolve, including how do we effectively involve stakeholders in this process in a meaningful dialogue. So that's a new evolving component of an integrated distribution system planning process that's going to require a lot of evolution. Next slide, please. Thank you. And at the edge of the grid, we've got a lot of evolution because we've got a host of different kinds of distributed energy resources, including EVs. And we're really trying to figure out how do we integrate and utilize these effectively. And we use this curve a lot because we're really trying to have people think about where they are on this curve, where they're headed on this curve, and what they need to do now to be able to move through this process of instituting more complex operations to be able to handle all this complexity at the grid, at the edge of the grid. So at stage one, there's low DER adoption, where emphasis is on resilience, reliability, et cetera. And there's really no material change to infrastructure needs or planning and operations. But as we move up this curve, where there's a moderate level of DER and EVs that are being adopted on the grid. Now we have to sit back a little bit and we have to go, okay, can we start utilizing DERs as either load modifying and energy resources? How do we build out our grid systems? How do we build our coordination systems between all these players so we can to utilize these in an effective and meaningful way? And when we get to stage 2, we really have to start thinking about how can we utilize integrated distribution system planning to move through that process to understand what our grid investment requirements are. And stage 3 is where we've got a very high level of DERs, EVs, et cetera. We're really now the consideration there is how do we optimize and orchestrate the DERs in a way that provide grid services, not only to customers, but to the grid, and including not only to the distribution system level, but to the bulk system level. And FERC 2222 is really pushing that envelope. We're going to have to start thinking about alternative grid structures like microgrids and nested microgrids, et cetera. And we need to think about how to deal with different ownership structures. Different parties may own these microgrids, et cetera. And we have to really start thinking about, back to the first slide, interjurisdictional coordination of markets and market design, planning, and operations. It used to probably about 5 or 10 years ago, most utilities were at stage 1. Many utilities are now at stage 2, and things are becoming really more complex. Next slide, please. So working with Lisa has been wonderful. Lisa Schwartz at LBNL. She's done a lot of studies. She'll get into this on what states are doing across the country. She'll share this in this integrated distribution system planning space. You'll see from this picture, which Lisa provided, that not all states undertake distribution system plans in which utilities are required by regulators to report on. So there's not universal application of distribution system planning across the country, and it's not consistently applied across the country. And so there still really needs to be a lot of work to advance integrated distribution system planning capabilities. And that's a conversation we want to get into. Where are we now? What are the issues that we really need to resolve with regard to the planning process? Let's develop some best practices around that. Let's try to evolve the industry in that space. Next slide, please. So I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive, if you don't mind, into what I think are really key aspects of this integrated distribution system planning process. And there are key inputs, and they include load and DER forecasting, understanding load growth due to electrification, data centers, new construction, understanding what the rate of DER adoption is, whether it's rooftop solar, energy storage, or grid interactive buildings, and moving the sophistication of our analyses to a more spatial and temporal granularity down at the feeder level with probabilistic analysis. Methods for doing this are evolving, and this is a key input into the distribution system planning process. Another key input is to really do climate and weather risk assessment, as folks are starting to look at forecasts of weather parameters like temperature, rainfall, drought, wildfire risk. They're starting to look at interdependencies between the electric system, natural gas system. It's really becoming important to be able to do risk assessments, to be able to look at the impact of these parameters on our infrastructure, and from that determine not only what our asset management strategy might have to be to make our assets on our infrastructure more robust, but also to determine our priorities around how do we protect critical infrastructure, critical services, and vulnerable populations. Another key input, another area that's undergoing a lot of evolution. And then finally, being able to, for communities and states, to come together to really start looking at their key policy objectives and particularly around the list that you're seeing here, reliability, resilience, equity, et cetera, and really being able to articulate those and turn those into planning guidance for a utility. And so these are key inputs, again, capabilities evolving. In the distribution system analysis and prioritization arena, part of the integrated distribution system planning process is just to do asset planning. What kind of infrastructure improvement do we need just to meet load growth, to meet needs for reliability and resilience, to deal with all the inputs we're seeing? How many DERs are coming on the system? And what kind of grid modernization do we actually need to implement to support DER integration and utilization? And this includes coordination, being able to coordinate effectively in an operational environment, all these DERs that third parties and customers might own. And I'll just get into that a little bit more. That includes things like to effectively utilize DERs that are owned or operated by folks other than utilities. We really have to start thinking about coordination frameworks. We really have to start thinking about how are we going to value those DERs and what kind of compensation can we provide to these folks other than utilities, for instance, that are providing these services, so they're dependable, reliable services, but also how do we compensate the utility effectively as well? Because the utility is going to own some of these DERs, and particularly, for instance, energy storage, right? Because if there's a lot of variability in the system, and there's a lot of load growth in the system with capacity constraints, the utility might also need to be able to invest in some of these distributed energy resources just to make sure that the system has enough flexibility and we're dealing with capacity constraints. And also embedded within an IDSP is the research, development, and demonstration strategy. Because if we're going to need more advanced capabilities in the grid moving forward, we're going to have to think about, well, what kind of RD&D do we need to undertake so that that capability becomes possible when we need it 8 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road. So the RD&D strategy is actually part of the integrated distribution system planning process. We need to be able to map the investment strategy back against the community and state goals, objectives, and priorities. And we need to have support a dialogue that enables that mapping. State going, here are my priorities. Utility, does your investment strategy actually map back to my objectives and priorities? That needs to be dealt with in this process. We need to be able to couple the distribution system plans with regional planning, and given constrained budgets, there are processes by which we're going to have to prioritize our investments because we can't do it all at once. So there's a stage strategy component to this. The output is an integrated distribution system plan that may look out 5 to 10 years. It could be done yearly, it could be done every 2 years, whatever. The grid modernization strategy implementation plan is a subsection of that. And there are annual plans that would show more immediate requirements for building out the grid. Now, I've kind of shown this as a serial process. It's not really a serial process. It's an iterative process. All these things are happening at the same time and have to feed each other. And so it's an iterative process with stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. This is just an example. I'm not going to go through this in detail at all. But we frequently take a look at Xcel Energy's roadmaps. They have got a pretty sophisticated integrated distribution system planning process in Minnesota. This is Xcel Energy's grid modernization roadmap. And what you'll see here is a stage strategy. You'll see near-term investments, medium-term investments, and long-term investments with a rationale as to why they want to do these investments in the order in which they've done it. And you'll see, for instance, they want to do a TOU rate pilot before they really start implementing AMI. They need to build out their communication systems. That's what the field area network is. Flizzr is just to improve the reliability of their distribution systems using fault location isolation for service restoration technologies, automated feeder switching, et cetera. They're looking at customer platforms. They're going to do electric vehicle pilots before they really build out their electric vehicle infrastructure, et cetera. So this kind of sort of logical thinking, the stage strategy really should be embedded within the integrated distribution system plan. Next slide. Lisa and Guillermo is going to be getting more into what we're looking at here. This is just another way of looking at all the different subcomponents of an integrated distribution system planning process, which I went through at a high level up above. But what I wanted to say here is that our office, in conjunction with NARUC and NASEO and with RMI, and also with Lisa Schwartz, is really trying to work with the industry, working with you, working with including regulators, state energy offices, et cetera, but also working with utilities to really build out this framework to a much better extent and be able to provide best practices within each of these different components. And Lisa is going to talk about that. But we really want to institute some best practices around the integrated distribution system planning process. And when you want to work with people like you and utilities, et cetera, stakeholders out there to really advance these practices and socialize some of them. Next slide. So I want to say that we've got a website that we've stood up. It links to the LBNL website in the integrated distribution system planning arena. I just want to point out, we've also got a lot of work in this operational coordination space. That space is really targeted at developing best practices with regard to the roles and responsibilities and information sharing requirements between DER aggregators, DER owners, and grid operators at the T and D level. That's what that is all about. And we've also got a distribution system design effort that's going to be looking at a whole bunch of different reference designs. And I encourage you to take a look at this, because the operational coordination effort and the distribution system design effort will be feeding our integrated distribution system planning efforts as well. Next slide, please. And that's it. And again, I just really appreciate your time. Thanks for letting me speak and share my thoughts on this. So thanks a lot, Katarina, and everybody else. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. We have a few minutes here for Q&A before we move into our poll and then our next set of presentations. So before we do that, if folks have a question, I would invite you to share it in the chat or use the raise hand feature on Zoom, or simply come off mute to ask your question. We have time for maybe one or two questions here.
I guess I can throw in a question here. Howdy, Dan Greengarten from the Colorado Energy Office. So I know you highlighted Excel in Minnesota and kind of a general process. I'm wondering, would they, or is there someone else you can point to that kind of has a current gold standard for this process that we could, access those people, talk to them, and really try to drill down into how we can model it?
Yeah, there are, Daniel. I think the National Grid has a really good process. I think Southern California Edison has a really, really good process. There's a host of utilities that are doing it. Let me see if we can get you a good list. Okay, and we'll work with Lisa and RMI to do that. Okay.
That would be
Because
wonderful.
the New York utilities went through this process. right?
Hmm.
And so they're pretty sophisticated here. They had a standing group of utilities that worked together over the 10 years to really sharpen their capabilities here. National Grid is part of that. And also Hawaii HECO has been really looking at more generalized regional planning for their state. It includes integrated distribution system planning plus more comprehensive planning for Hawaii. So I would look at the HECO work as well. But California, Minnesota, New York, some New England states, maybe at the forefront of really doing more complex state-of-the-art integrated distribution system planning.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. Anyone else holding a question they would like to ask?
There's much more fun stuff coming later, so.
Indeed. All right, well, I think we'll leave it for there. Feel free to add any questions in the chat as they come up. And Joe will be sticking around for our discussions afterwards, so you may have an opportunity to speak more with him on some of the topics. Thank
Great.
you so much, Joe, for
Thank
that
you.
presentation. All right, before we move into our second presentation for today, we want to pause and introduce 6 subtopics of IDSP. I pull them up right now. All right, so these subtopics are informed by the framework that Joe alluded to earlier and will be discussed a little bit more in detail in the next presentations, and are meant to be components or key pieces of the IDSP overall framework. We're going to use these subtopics to structure the breakout discussions later today, as well as potentially inform future work streams. So I'm going to take a moment to walk through each of the 6 of them here, and then pause for questions, and then move into a poll. The first is to translating community and state goals and policies into IDSP guidance. This is really related to that slide that Joe showed of how the different stakeholder groups are engaging and ensuring the objectives and metrics are aligned across. The second is aligning distribution planning and other planning efforts. These could be planning such as integrated resource plans, transmission planning, as well as state level planning around state priorities such as electrification or economic development, etc. The third is strategies for forecasting load and DER adoption. And importantly here, integrating DER adoption or forecasting both as a resource and as additions to the grid. The fourth is assessing reliability and resilience of the distribution system, another thing Joe alluded to earlier. The fifth is sourcing solutions to meet customer and grid needs, especially thinking about the pricing, programs, and procurements of DER options and aggregated DERs. And then finally, using distribution system planning to inform grid modernization and prioritization of different investments. So I'll pause here for a second. Are there any questions about these topics at a high level, or is there anything related to integrated distribution system planning in your jurisdiction that is not covered here that it is as important or equally important and you want to share? You can use the chat feature to note some additions or ask any questions here. Okay, we'll have a chance to iterate more on these and describe them further in some of our breakout discussions. This is just meant to make sure that we're not missing anything major that's top of mind for you. All right, we are going to do a short poll before we have breakouts later this afternoon. So in a moment, Alex has just dropped the poll EV link. You can also access this by going to pollev.com/RMI601. You're going to be presented with the very first question. How familiar are you with integrated distribution system planning? This is meant as a warm-up to get familiar with poll EV and to see across the room where folks are, who do we have in this room? So give a second for everyone to respond here. If you have any trouble finding this poll, please come off mute and let us know. Okay. So it looks like the majority are the largest grouping is around somewhat familiar. We have a couple folks who are very familiar, maybe potentially working with IDSP today. Some folks who are a little bit more new. Nobody who is hearing about this concept for the first time today. All right. We're going to go to the second question here. The second question will help us determine some of the breakout group discussions and help us understand which of these topics is feeling most relevant to your work today. So specifically, which of the following subtopics, the same as the ones I walked through earlier, would be or is currently most relevant to your work? A few more moments here. It seems like folks are still adding. We're seeing some trends around the translating community and state goals and policies into guidance and using distribution planning to inform grid modernization and prioritization. Fewer folks are working directly on the strategies for forecasting load and DER adoption. All right. We're going to move into our final poll question here. So we spent a moment thinking about what's most relevant to your work today. This is an opportunity to surface the topic or the subtopic that is most challenging or faces the most challenges in your jurisdiction. That could be barriers, that could be it's completely unknown, what is challenging or is facing challenges in your jurisdiction. All right, interesting. We have a little bit less of a spread across topics so far. Very strong focus on challenges and translating the goals and priorities into guidance. I'll give a couple more seconds here for folks to fill in, share anything else. It's notable to me that there are the strategies for forecasting load and DER adoption. It's not coming up as the most challenging for anyone here. All right. Well, thank you so much for engaging in this poll. Like I said, this will be helpful in informing our breakout group discussions and understanding what you're each facing in your day-to-days. We are now going to move into our second presentation for today. We have with us two fabulous speakers from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Lisa Schwartz, who is the Senior Policy Researcher and Strategic Advisor for the Energy Markets and Policy Department, and her colleague Guillermo Pereira, who is an Energy Policy Advisor in the same department. They're here today to provide an overview of several of the excellent resources available today on IDSP, and we'll also share some live demos of these. It's a treat to have them both with us here. Over to you.
Thanks, Katerina. I'm Lisa Schwartz with Berkeley Lab. Next slide, please. Berkeley Lab is creating an interactive online version of the integrated distribution planning framework that Joe Palladino just showed you. Next slide, please. So you'll be able to look under the hood of all of those boxes you've been seeing over the years and get summary information on 17 key planning topics shown here, from hosting capacity analysis to threat-based risk assessment, from stakeholder engagement and equity considerations to coordinated planning and scenario analysis. Next slide. So for each of these topics, you'll see consistently the following sections. First, an overview that defines the topic, explains its importance for distribution planning explicitly, and provides answers to frequently asked questions. Next, you'll see roles and responsibilities for Public Utility Commissions, state energy offices, utilities, utility consumer offices, and other stakeholders throughout the planning process, not just up front and not just at the end. There's also a menu of best practices to advance distribution planning, as well as common state practices for addressing various aspects of distribution planning. And there are examples of how utilities are implementing distribution planning activities that are relevant to the specific topic. And there's also a flow chart that visually represents information flows and processes. And we provide a list of tools that can be used for analysis for each of these topics. And finally, there's an annotated resource list that provides more information on the topic. Guillermo is going to give us a live demonstration of this interactive framework.
Thank you, Lisa. Can you see my screen?
Looks good.
Thank you. So yes, when you open Berkeley Lab's online interactive ideas spree framework, you are going to see a version of the diagram that Lisa was just showing. This one is interactive. All the 17 sections are going to live within this interactive framework. And for today's demo, I'm going to be showing you the distribution system analysis, and within it, the hosting capacity analysis section. So when you click on distribution system analysis, if you scroll down the page, you're going to see a description of what these analyses are, why are they important, what is their objective. And you're also going to see some dark blue sections, which are the ones included in Lisa's list, so the ones that are part of the framework in its current version. And you're going to see some grayed out areas. And these are equally important. They are just not part of the current version that Berkeley Lab has developed. So for today's demo, I will go through the hosting capacity analysis section that you can click on the left side of the screen on this menu. And when you do that, you're going to reach this overview page that defines hosting capacity, describes why hosting capacity analysis is important, and also provides you with a list of key questions. How is hosting capacity used, for example? We also have a question that describes the different tools and methodologies that utilities can use to perform hosting capacity, as another example. When you go to roles and responsibilities, you're going to see a list of stakeholders and the different ways in which they can engage and shape the hosting capacity analysis process. When you click on best practices, you're going to be able to find a list of effective ways to advance the practice of hosting capacity analysis for distribution system planning. When you click on state practices, we have curated a list of states and their hosting capacity analysis requirements. These can either be regulatory driven or legislation driven. So for example, we have Illinois in the case of CEJA that defines the hosting capacity analysis requirements that are needed to be met. And similarly for utility practice, you're going to see a list of different states and the utilities and what they are doing in terms of hosting capacity analysis. And when you click on these links, you're going to be able to either access their hosting capacity analysis maps or data available online. When you look at the flow chart, in this case, we have a format, which is an input, method, tool, output flow chart. So what are the inputs that go into hosting capacity analysis, the characteristics of the system where the DERs are interconnecting, the characteristics of the DER itself. In the middle, we have a list of tools and methods that can be used. And on the right side, what are the outputs that can emerge from this type of analysis? And further expanding on the tools, we have a list of the tools and models that utilities can use to perform or support hosting capacity analysis work. And we have links to those, so you can navigate to either the developers, or in the example of the Berkeley Labs Lodge model, you can see an example analysis and understand how the tools can be used, which may inform your own process in your own jurisdiction. And the last section provides a list of curated resources. And in this case, we provide you with a summary of what the resource is about and how it connects to hosting capacity analysis. And this is going to be similar for every one of those 17 sections that Lisa was explaining. And if you scroll down, you're going to be able just to go in chronological order through the different resources available. So back to Lisa now for the presentation.
Thanks, Guillermo. So the interactive framework that Guillermo just showed will be available very soon. In the meantime, I'm going to talk about a second interactive product that is available online now on Berkeley Lab's website. Next slide, please. We recently posted a data visualization and online catalog of state requirements for distribution planning. And as this new product reflects, grid edge resources are a major motivator of these requirements, also grid modernization and lots of other, goals and objectives that states have. I am pausing because my video is going nuts. For some reason, my video keeps turning off. Sorry about that. So this new data viz and catalog summarize legislative and regulatory requirements for electric utilities to file some type of distribution system plan in 19 states and the District of Columbia. And I want to thank all of the Public Utility Commission staff who reviewed and validated the information for us. And we will update all of this information in the fall. Again, you can access this now at the link at the bottom of the slide. The data visualization is an interactive interface to identify state by state requirements for the different kinds of distribution plans that utilities file. The next, next slide, please. The different types of distribution plans that utilities file, the filing frequency, the planning horizon, consideration of distributed resources as non-wires alternatives, and hosting capacity analysis. When you use this tool, you can create your own maps and you can embed it into your own web content or export to your documents. For example, if you're trying to benchmark your state's requirements, you're trying to develop new requirements, this could be a handy document to share around your commission or state energy office and with your stakeholders. So, of course, we ask you to give credit to Berkeley Lab when you use these things. The online catalog also provides detailed information by state, legislative and regulatory requirements, proceedings and orders, the filed utility plans, state planning goals and objectives, how long is the action plan, what's the term, and stakeholder engagement and equity provisions. Next slide, please. Soon we will have a Berkeley Lab report that is a complement to the online catalog and data visualization that reviews state requirements as well as utility approaches for distribution planning. So we'll cover all the topics I just talked about and more, so including state goals and objectives, all the procedural requirements for a utility to submit a plan and for stakeholders to engage in the commission's review process. Stakeholder engagement, forecasting loads and levels of distributed resources, including EVs, hosting capacity analysis, providing information on the current state of the utility's distribution system, what kind of requirements are states promulgating to get a better handle on that. Grid modernization strategy, the utility's grid needs assessment, what do they need to take care of on the distribution system to accommodate the new loads Joe talked about, as well as ensure safe and reliable service and resilience. Non-wire solutions is part of the set of utility and third-party solutions that can be considered to meet the identified grid needs. Reliability, as well as resilience analyses, consideration of equity. And distribution plans are really good places to tee up potential pilots. They could be programs, they could be microgrid projects, time-varying pricing, all kinds of things. It's a good place to tee up. The commission may approve programs and projects through other processes, tariff filings, or in rate cases, but it is important to include all of the programs and pilots that might contribute toward meeting distribution system needs and customer needs. And finally, coordination with a whole slew of other planning processes, whether you're a vertically integrated state that still has integrated resource planning, or you're trying to coordinate transmission and distribution planning, bring in all of the demand side management processes, electrification plans, climate change plans. There are a host of planning processes, and really, bringing these things together is a really critical part of integrated distribution plan. So again, this data visualization and online catalog is available right now. And Guillermo, once again, is going to provide a live demo for us.
Thank you, Lisa. Hopefully you can see my screen. So when you get to Berkeley Lab's webpage, and the link is in the chat if you want to do that today, you're going to get to this landing page, and the information on the landing page describes what is available when you get to this online visualization and data catalog, describes the interactive map, the online catalog, and what is included. And it also provides a link to the forthcoming report on state requirements for distribution system planning, and what are some of the areas where we provide best case practices. When you click on the map and table is where you are able to do a lot of the interaction, and you are able to see on the left side of the screen a mapping tool, and we capture the diversity of different plans that exist across the states we analyzed. And you are able to toggle through on this menu, and for instance, if you want to see which states have a distribution system plan in place, you can click on that, and the map will react, and you have your customized map with the specific criteria you wanted to observe. You can clean that up. You are also able to see which states have a hosting capacity analysis requirement in place, and when you click on that, you will see in darker gray which are the states that require, and in lighter gray the ones that don't, and the similar logic for non-wires alternatives. In darker gray, when you click on that, the ones that require, in lighter grays, the ones that don't. On the right side of the toggles, you're going to be able to filter through different filing frequency requirements for the plans, or the planning horizons that are included, so you can understand which states are approaching filing requirements or planning horizons in a variety of different ways. If you scroll down on this page, you're going to have similar information, but in table format, which may be helpful for your analysis. And that includes the types of plans per jurisdiction for each line. And again, which states require non-wires alternatives, or which states require hosting capacity analysis. So this is a complement to the map above. When you click on the online catalog, you have two options. You can visualize the catalog on this page, or you can follow the instructions and just open it in a new tab, which is my personal preference. And here you can find all the details that support the online visualization and the forthcoming report. For each state, you're going to be able to see the legislation that relates to distribution system planning, the proceedings related to commission requirements, and also the proceedings related to utility plans and the commission orders on those plans if you keep scrolling to the right. You're also going to be able to see plan details such as the goals and objectives, the frequency of filing specified, the planning horizon that has to be considered, stakeholder engagement details when those are available, equity details, and more granular information on hosting capacity analysis that isn't captured in the map, but that is equally relevant, as well as for non-wires alternatives analysis. Going back to the data visualization page, the last tab is where you can create your own maps, as Lisa was explaining, and the tool is the same as the one on this second tab I was just showing you. But you can, for instance, just choose, as an example, I want to customize a map for hosting capacity analysis, and I want to include this in a report or presentation I'm working on. You scroll down to the bottom of the page, and on the bottom right, you're going to find this link, this button to download. And it gives you different options on how you can export this into an image. And then you have a customized image to include in a report or presentation. So that is the tool. And again, the link is in the chat if you're curious and want to use it today. And back to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Guillermo. Well, my last topic is a new technical assistance program funded by the U.S. Department of Energy for both public utility commissions and state energy offices. And the link is listed here, and we'll also put it in the chat. Next slide, please. There are 3 kinds of assistance that you request. 2 are available right now and will be continuing. The first one is a help desk, and this is like for a quick and limited response, roughly 4 hours or less. You can get help pretty quickly. The second one is what we call expert match, and this is for issues that might require a little bit more time, but still take, less than 2 weeks roughly to get done. And third, and perhaps most important for integrated distribution planning, which often, takes a while to get going, even if you're updating your guidelines or requirements, is the in-depth support. And these are for issues that warrant really considerable effort, something like 80 hours or more. Pete Cappers at Berkeley Lab is leading this program in partnership with 2 other labs, NREL and Pacific Northwest National Lab. Importantly, how do you apply? So you go on Berkeley Lab's website at the website shown, statetaprogram.lbl.gov. For the help desk and the expert match options, there's a simple 5-question intake form. Again, help is available now for these 2 and will continue in the future. For in-depth support, a detailed application form is due June 19th. June 19th. And awardees will be notified by Department of Energy in mid to late September. So this is something that, is not available right now. It's something that you're planning for your needs for, starting, late September-ish through the following year. I want to point out there also will be limited opportunities to consider out-of-cycle requests for in-depth assistance. This is something that we really urge DOE to do. Because we know that things can happen out of cycle, and so we want to be able to provide support, but it will be a more limited opportunity. So to learn more, see the website. There are virtual office hours, including today, as well as on 3 other dates. Also, you can register for a public webinar this Friday, May 3rd, to learn more and ask questions. Next slide, please. The program can provide support on virtually any electricity-related topic, but the focus is on addressing inquiries in 4 key topical areas: integrated grid planning, and integration of end-use technologies, operation of grid edge devices, and distribution and bulk power systems, electricity markets and compensation, and resource adequacy, reliability, and resilience. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa and Guillermo. This is a wealth of opportunities here. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask now with regards to the immediate opportunities, some of the resources shared here? Anything on this topic? If you're holding a question, seems like you could ask it now or join one of the upcoming office hours. So there's plenty of opportunities, but you're on this call now, so that might make the most sense to ask now. All right. I'm not hearing any questions for now. Thank you so much, Lisa and Guillermo, for sharing those opportunities here. And as a reminder, please check out some of the links in the websites in order to learn more information about State Technical Assistance Program, as well as these upcoming and already available resources here. We are now at the halfway part of our session for today. So where we are on the agenda, you've had a chance to hear from some of the best and brightest minds and people thinking about this IDSP topic. And the rest of today is going to focus on where the rubber meets the road. So thinking about how IDSP is showing up across states today and starting to tie the major gaps and challenges into some of the topics that we talked about earlier. The rest of this session is designed for NARUC, NASEO, and NASUCA folks. So if you're not part of one of these organizations or one of these stakeholders, please take this time to transition out of this meeting. And I'll also ask Danielle to stop the recording here as we move into more free